All right, we're
Right.
12 o'clock by my.
So we are broadcasting.
Let me get my share screen up here. Can you give me the sharing?
Yep.
Okay.
Right, you should be good to go.
All right. All right. Slideshow.
All right, for those of us who are joining us right now, we're going to wait just a few more minutes just to give other people a little bit more time to come into the Zoom. This is going to be streaming live on Facebook right now, and it will be up on YouTube. All right, so it looks like the numbers coming in have stabilized a little bit. Thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Phillips. I'm the Visitor Engagement Coordinator at the San Diego History Center. And I'm joined today by Justine Clark, our educator at the History Center, and Barry Goldlust, our community historian. This is going to be the fourth presentation in our San Diego 101 webinar series. We also want to extend a special thank you to our members for all of your support and for coming to check these webinars out. If anyone out there is interested in our previous presentations, they're available on the History Center's YouTube channel. I went ahead and I put the link in the chat. And for those of you who were here last time, I made sure it works this time, so it should be good to go. I have just a couple of quick things to go over before we begin. We're going to be answering questions as usual at the end of the presentation. So please use the Q&A function to ask any questions, although Justine and I will be monitoring both that and the chat. This presentation should be uploaded to YouTube later this week. So if for some reason you have to leave or you want to check it out a little bit later, it will be available on our YouTube channel. Again, the link is just in the chat. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Barry.
Thank you. Greetings again. I continue to be Barry Goldlust, community historian and volunteer at the History Center. It's fun to be here again with you. And we continue to bring to you the history of our San Diego area, which is the objective of the San Diego History Center. And our two museum sites, the History Center at Balboa Park and the Surrey Museum at the top of historic Presidio Hill. And you can see we still have this huge collection of information available eventually to the public when our world becomes a bit more normal. So Uh, we're going to talk about the transition from Old Town to New Town. Basically, it's a discussion of how Newtown became the new center of town, and how while that was happening, basically Old Town just became old. The period of time we will be talking about is from 1850 to 1887. And of course, this time period does overlap the period that we discussed previously about the growth of Old Town. But when we were talking about Old Town, we weren't talking much about New Town and some of the activities that were going on at that point. So we're going to pick up the story of Newtown in 1850. That was the year that California became a state. And we're going to take this up to the time that the connection to the Transcontinental Railroad occurs. So it's a period of just under 40 years, but chock full of developments and information. So let's start. Once again, my favorite slide. We will just to remind us all about how large or how small the population was over this period of time. Way back when the pueblo of San Diego was formed, about 500 people, not too many more by 1850. And then we go through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and you can see that there's some growth during that period of time, but it's slow and modest. And we'll talk about that as well. So what are the key dates that cover this period we're talking about? Well, here's 1834, when the pueblo of San Diego was granted self-government. We'll talk about the two attempts at making Newtown a viable center of town. Just as a marker, 1872, the Old Town Fire was one of the major events that basically put an end to the influence of Old Town as the San Diego center, all the way up to the arrival of the Transcontinental Rail Link. So let's take a look at this map, and we will, just for orientation, so we can see which parts of our San Diego Bay we're talking about. Recall that the ships would come through this narrow opening into the bay, and this is Ballast Point. This is that small town where all the hide houses were located, La Playa. And then a little further down, if you remember, Lewis Rose, the first Jewish settler here in Old Town, bought some property and called it, and its present name as well, Roseville. Here's Old Town, which is illustrated along with the two main paths of the San Diego River, which did vary based on environmental changes. So one branch or one period, it might enter into False Bay, or as we call it, Mission Bay now. Sometimes it would work its way down into San Diego Bay. And the area that we're really going to talk about is the area that we'll refer to as Newtown. And this is the Davis area, basically from Front Street to the bay. and Horton's addition, which is a much larger property, and we'll be talking about that as well. So the inklings of a new town. The word inkling has a mysterious glow to it. Little figures running around trying to invade some place. But in any event, we're talking about the first attempt in 1850 of settling and growing a new center of town. Why? Because this area sat on the bay, and it was very difficult to move objects from or deliveries from the La Playa area overland to Old Town for distribution. That was a several-hour coach ride, and so the objective was to grow a city center on the bay. So what do we need in terms of growing a city? We need visionaries, investors. We need a whole lot of infrastructure, raw materials, services, businesses. We need people to build, and residents to partake in the daily life. And also a really nice thing to have is a port. And fortunately, we have a really good one here in San Diego that at that point needed to be developed. And so as we go through the description of how these two attempts to build a new town center fulfilled these various requirements. So here's Andrew Gray. Andrew Gray was a member of the Joint Boundary Commission. It was a commission set up by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. It was the 1848, where at the end of the Mexican-American War, a binational commission to determine the Mexican border between Mexico and California. And so he had a chance to see a good part of the area. And in fact, he turned out to be really the visionary in this first attempt at developing a new town. He met up with William Heath Davis in 1850, and Davis had some financial backing and his own finances to be interested in this endeavor. And so along with several other investors, they purchased a plot of land, 160 acres, basically from Front Street to the bay, going west. And that 160 acres cost them a little over $2,300, or about $14 an acre. We'll keep that in mind as we talk about the cost that Horton spent to purchase his property. So that was $14 an acre. Davis, you'll frequently see in the literature reference to Davis's folly. It was a failure to be able to settle and develop this center of a new center here in Newtown. But he was basically in the right place, but the wrong time. He had many accomplishments. They were able to convince the Army barracks to move from Old Town to his area. A couple of hotels were built. A park was was built as well. Pantoja Park, which is still in existence down there. The San Diego Herald was founded here. And he was able to convince the lumber company to move from La Playa to Newtown. And that was very important because there really wasn't a lot of building material. And the building materials did not come from the area. In fact, about a dozen pre-cut homes were ordered by Heath Davis to be transported from Maine around South America's Horn, Cape Horn to San Diego. And a few of these are still standing too in Old Town. The Davis Horton House, the oldest building in downtown San Diego, was one of these as well. And it was a good idea. He wanted to jumpstart the development because he knew that there wasn't much in the way of construction material, and they weren't going to go back certainly to using adobe. So there were a number of things that were accomplished, but it wasn't enough. They could not attract more investors. They could not attract people. There just weren't enough services. There was a water issue. They did drill a well or wells in this area, but the water quality was very bad. In fact, one of the wells was built on what is now Broadway, and the first name of Broadway was actually Spring Street. But they could not attract a custom house, telegraph lines, a courthouse. And so in addition to that, as if something else needed to go wrong, he lost $700,000. Davis lost $700,000 in assets in a fire in San Francisco. So that was pretty much the end of this endeavor. So I just repeat that this wasn't so much a folly as just poor timing and lack of resources. Okay, so that was 1850 to about 1852. At that point, in addition to personal financial difficulties, the city was in difficulty and came under trusteeship form of government. They had 3 trustees that were elected to run San Diego. So not much happened through the late 50s and into the 60s. Of course, we had the Civil War that occurred. And so it was not a time that was conducive to building a new city center. But 1867, post-Civil War, things began to happen, and they happened very, very quickly. Here is a picture of the father of San Diego, Alonzo Horton. He arrives in 1867, born in Connecticut, lived in upstate New York, was involved in a lot of businesses. And he also stopped off on the way west because he had some health problems. He was headed west, and he stopped off in Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, he had some business dealings. And oh, by the way, he actually founded a city. He founded the city of Hortonville, population 2,700 currently. Yes, it still exists. It might have been a major city had he stayed on, but he didn't, and he kept moving eventually to San Francisco, where he got involved in some gold mines and harvesting ice as a business. And then in 1867, found, as he called it, the prettiest place for a city I ever saw. And he had heard people talking about San Diego and how great it was. The climate was really terrific. And so he comes down to um, San Diego. He actually has to, the last few steps from the boat, he has to be carried on someone's back to shore because there wasn't a wharf and it was uh, uh, too shallow for a boat to get close. So that was his arrival. And once again, we can go back to this slide I showed a few minutes ago and talk about the things that needed to be done. Well, with the description I gave you of the Davis Gray attempt, you can see that a number of areas obviously weren't fulfilled and nothing much happened, and it turned out to be a failed attempt. Well, now we're going to watch how Horton manages to do what looked like the impossible. We have to remember that Horton was an extremely good business person. He had no malice in him. He was very generous, and he was really good at building relationships. And so when he started out, he would bring investors down from San Francisco and offer them free lots. So that's just a tip of the iceberg. So let's follow his endeavors. So a bit differently than Davis, instead of 160 acres, Horton went big. He went for a much larger parcel of land. And the quick story, the trustees there needed to be an election of trustees before they can auction off land. So when Horton was faced with this situation, he talked to George Pendleton, who was the clerk, county clerk and recorder, and said, can we have an auction? And he said, no, we have to elect the trustees, and I can't do it. And so Horton said, how much would it cost you to do this here? $5. So Horton gave him $10. And they both worked to put up notices. They did a 10-day notice to get the election going. So they got 3 new trustees in place, and then they approved the auctioning of this property. And when the auction started, Horton was offering way too much money, but people were literally laughing at him. He didn't have much competition, and eventually he understood, or very quickly, that he didn't have to bid very high to get this land. And so he was able to, as you can see, he got several notations here. It added up to $265.50 for 960 acres. So that comes out to 28 cents an acre, as opposed to $14 an acre that Davis and his investors had to pay. We checked with our staff trying to figure out why the difference, and there was just kind of a guess as to why, and perhaps it had to do with the fact that nobody really thought very much of this land anyway, and whoever bought it was pretty foolish to do that. So Horton got this for relatively little. There was also a parcel of land uh, that Horton had to pay $4,000 for. I don't know how large that piece of land was, how much part of this 960 or addition, but it became part of the Horton addition. So with that $4,000, the price of per acre came up to $4, still well below the $14 that uh, 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 Davis had to pay. So this is kind of a neat uh, uh, document that is located in our archives. So let's see what was so spectacular, or how Horton made this spectacular. Well, here's a blow up of the area. Went from the bay up until Upas Street, which is the border between Hillcrest and Bankers Hill. You can see it in this part of the complete map. And eventually, or pretty soon after he arrived, 1,400 acres of land was put aside for a city park, nestled right next to Horton's addition. Convenient, yes. Brilliant, yes. And the land value was enhanced dramatically. The other thing he did was he made very short blocks, narrow streets, short blocks, because the short blocks meant that there were more corner lots and people would pay more for a corner lot. There were no alleys because Horton believed that alleys just collected trash. And so you probably don't find any alleys until you get up to the street. There's one alley actually right behind my house. So this was the setting: 960 acres of land as opposed to Davis's 160, which was located right down here. And this whole area here is a place called Middletown. And unless you do some reading about it, most people really know nothing about Middletown. It does have a history. A lot of property was bought up in 1850, actually, but no development was done for many, many decades. So we won't talk about that, but just for orientation purposes, that's where it is. Once again, we saw this slide before. The old towners just didn't believe that this effort was going to work. It didn't work in 1850. Why should it work now? There's a lot of antagonism towards the new settlement, just 3.5 miles further south. And this particular individual felt that the effort would soon be abandoned, as in 1850. How wrong he was. So another summary slide, because there's so much information. This is the only way to be able to emphasize how much Horton and people around him. So not only Horton, but there were other investors as well, buying up some property in the area. So between 1868 and 1870, roughly a 3-year period, there were many, many things that were accomplished. The first hotel, it was actually done brilliantly. A person came into town and wanted to build a hotel, and he was basically sold a piece of property that Horton had purchased from the Davis parcel. So this was adjacent to Horton's addition, but not in it. So this was the first hotel. It became Donnell's Hotel and then the new San Diego Hotel. I just mentioned about the city park. He and others, businessmen from Old Town, started kind of getting interested in moving into the area. And a year after Horton's arrival, The trustees agreed to set aside 1,400 acres for what is now Balboa Park. The first hotel that was built, the Bayview Hotel, first hotel built in Horton's addition, first general merchandising store, Joseph Nash, and he had written in the front of his store something about the store name and the population of San Diego, 23. 1869 wharf was completed. This was a requirement by the city for buying the property that he built the wharf. So the wharf was built. Eventually, it was a 2,000 foot wharf built at the foot of Fifth Street. One of the other things, these investors, including Horton, donated land for specific purposes. And he donated land that upon which the first church, the First Baptist Church, was built. And that happened also with incentives for schools. Property was given away so that a school might be built. In 1870, you start seeing a growth of buildings, not just commercial buildings, to go along with the 120, 130 homes that were already built in Old Town. So you have the beginnings of the Chamber of Commerce. 2 banks were built, and we'll talk a little bit more about these 2 buildings. The bolded structures are structures that we'll show some pictures of. Interesting about banks, we take them for granted, but before banks were built, people used to bury their money. And if you remember that old saying, I'll go dig up some money, they literally did when they needed it. They buried their money and dug it up when they needed. So there's some history behind some of these sayings. Curiously, I was interested in Horton's assets. What was he a millionaire? Was he not? Well, he had pretty well off when he started, but he wasn't what we would think of as a millionaire. So in the year between 67 and 73, when all this activity was going on, when all his investments were really taking off, he went and from 1867 to 69, I believe that's a 500-fold increase in assets. These numbers were taken directly out of a reference, so it's a secondary reference. And I don't know if he actually had other assets as well. And then in 1873, his assets increased almost threefold from 69. So this is probably about the peak of his wealth. And if you converted this into 2020 values, you can say he did get to be a millionaire. You'd think that that was good, and he would end up, living his life and as a well-to-do person. But it wasn't true. By early 1900s, he died in 1909. So early 1900s, he was actually quite poverty-stricken, and that was on. People were lending him money. And part of the reason was the economic climates over the years, but he was also a very generous guy, and he gave away lots of property, and he was one of the only, well, at one point probably the major employer in Newtown, and so he felt an obligation as these booms and busts from speculators looking for railroad property came into town, and so he would defray mortgage payments. He would keep people employed. So he invested a huge amount of money in this endeavor. Another interesting thing I came across, what kind of businesses? Well, 85 different kinds of jobs. Of course, haven't listed them all, but very interesting. These are the numbers that I did find. There are more lawyers than saloon keepers and physicians. So that's kind of interesting. Um, one person listed as a gentleman, one capitalist, and one windmill builder, which sort of reminds me of Don Quixote. It just struck me that way. But in any event, lots of farmers, lots of miners. And as the author said, and if they weren't in any of these occupations, they went into real estate. Because over this time, and we'll tell this story a little bit more detail in the next presentation, there was always this expectation that a connection to the transcontinental railroad would be built. So people were always looking for real estate. What did this place look like in 1869? Well, there was a wharf, Point Loma in the background. Well, maybe 2,000 people living, total Old Town and New Town, and pretty sparse. A little closer view of Horton's Wharf with the foot of it at 5th Street. Right? Still pretty sparse, 1869. And now we'll talk a little bit about some of the buildings. Now you can see the brick buildings. This was Horton's Hall, one of the first buildings that was put up. Looks very different than Old Town. No adobe, no wood, mostly brick, and typical of homes and buildings. There were many uses that were in play. This Horton's Hall was a store on the street level, and upstairs, quite a large, I believe they said, room for 400 people. They had public meetings, they had recitals, sometimes used as a church. So this was a big deal. 1870, this was built, and the grand structure, Horton's House. This is in 1872, but it was actually completed in 10 months in 1870. 10 months, has more than 100 rooms. It had its own gas works. It had 55-foot deep fresh water well that produced thousands of gallons of water. And that water also was used by some other businesses as well. And on the first floor, 20 rooms were set aside for, as they described in the book, invalids, disabled individuals, and there was a dining room on the same level. And so this was Horton building this rather interesting, unique and amazing building in 1870 with hot and cold running water and lighting from the gas works. Quite a place, nice big square in front. This is located 4th and D Streets, D being Broadway now, and right at the location where the U.S. Grand Hotel is located. It was around for about 35 years. Also, Horton set up this garden, not quite near where he lived, but probably not too far, at least by our measurements. bringing varieties from around the world. The foliage in this area was almost nil, so there really wasn't much in the way of native plants. And he brought a wide variety of plants, fruits, and vegetables for two related reasons: to show visitors who come to San Diego, and also trying to induce many people to live in the area. So referring to the Horton House, the San Diego Union in 1870 said, in making this great outlay at a time when many were despondent and when throughout the state a severe depression has prevailed, Mr. Horton has fully shown his faith in San Diego and his great public spirit. Yes, he went on, despite this depression actually was countrywide, and despite the daunting possibilities of failed financial endeavors, he kept on. And as I said, eventually his finances dwindled, but he was on a mission, and his mission was to build this new center of town. As we might recall from our last presentation, the building of a new courthouse it was in process in 1871. So that was the year that the county records were brought from the Whaley House in Old Town to a temporary quarters in Newtown, and then eventually the courthouse was completed in 1872, and the county records brought there. So this is again this brick building, the new county courthouse, 1872. It was functioning for 90 years, so well into the 1900s, located at D and Front Streets, just adjacent to the area that Davis owned, Davis and his investors. It was also a multi-center structure that contained the court, the jail, the county records. The county recorder had his offices. The board of supervisors had offices there. The sheriff, the district attorney. It was the single center of the town, if you will. Very important landmark for the validity of Newtown as a center of the new city. Another building, very important, the Horton Bank building. Again, multiple functions in these buildings. Western Union. Remember, one of the things about building a city was to make sure that there was infrastructure. And so they had a telegraph, and I believe even when the Horton House was built, they might have had a telegraph connection there. Wells Fargo Express Company was also located in this building, picture in 1872. Okay, we'll take a look at some more photos. Here is one from 1870. Once again, pretty sparse, looking out over San Diego Bay with the wharf. Little closer view. Here we have 1880. So this is a really important thing. 1880, this was right around the time that things started happening with the railroad connection. Contract was signed saying that the railroad company agreed to build this connection to the Transcontinental Railroad. And take a look here. The population census was around 2,600. Still doesn't look like there are very many people here. There's an interesting structure here. I keep referring to it, but I'm not quite sure what it is. If anybody knows, let me know. Maybe our staff can do a little research on that as well. And so, drum roll, 1885, after some difficulties in building the actual tracks, the arrival of the first train through this connection from the Transcontinental Railroad occurred. And the terminus was a national city. We will talk about that big time next presentation. I won't divulge too much, but Alonzo was beaten out by Frank Kimball down in National City. Outbid him, and this is a photo of what the terminus station looked like in National City. So here we've gone from the failed attempt 1850 to the rather successful point here 1885. The railroad finally comes, and there's no question that this is the future. This area is the future of San Diego, and a successful endeavor started by Horton and continued by several others to build a city that starts looking more and more like the city that we know today. So that is what happened. The boom, 1887. The population grows to maybe 35, 40,000. Although by 1890, the census says 16,000. So what happened to all these people? Went from 40,000 down to 16. Something must have happened. And I'll reveal that one thing for you. The railroad company left town right after this point. So by 1890, there were a lot of people who had invested in a lot of land, who lost a lot of money, left town. Only probably retirees who really didn't have a lot of investments. They stayed on because of the climate. This was a significant event, the coming of the railroad, and in the sense the going of the railroad. There was still a connection between San Diego and Los Angeles, but not a direct connection to the Transcontinental Railroad. And so that caused this severe recession in this particular area. And so with that, I will just advertise our next presentation, which continues or will backtrack and backfill a lot of the information behind the involvement of the railroad in the development of areas away from downtown San Diego. So we're going to talk a bit about the expansion of San Diego to some of the local neighborhoods, areas like National City and Logan Heights. So at this point, thanks very much for your attention, and let's get to some Q&A. Appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks everyone for joining us. We do have a couple of questions so far. The first is from Nancy Carroll Carter. She asked, where was Horton's home and famous garden located within his new addition?
I don't have all this memorized. I can't quote that offhand. I have a book that's sitting right next to me, but The fact of the matter is that what we considered long distances really weren't long distances. 2 or 3 blocks was considered a long distance from where between areas. So it wasn't very far. The gardens and the home weren't very far. Horton actually had a couple of homes. I know one was on First Street, which is a little further uptown, and that was probably considered way out of town. So I know that one location on Fur. And I think the gardens. I think there was a slide on the gardens that actually had the address. Here we go. Yeah, 2nd, 3rd A and B streets.
Nancy followed up with a remark that you had shown the slide with the location. She jumped the gun, but it's worth it to kind of follow up on. The gardens themselves are pretty spectacular. So the next question comes from Charles Kaminsky, and I believe it's referencing the structure that was in the photo you referred to about 10 minutes ago.
Yes.
He asked whether it may have been a water channel.
Quite possibly. Quite possibly. Here we go. Yes, now I'm on a vengeance here to get this described. It could very well have been. This is 1880. The first water company, I believe, was around 1872, the San Diego Water Company, and so they may have built some structures. Most of the water at this time was actually coming from the San Diego River and some wells that were drilled in the Newtown area. So good. Thank you for that suggestion. I'll look at it a little more closely.
The next question comes from the chat. Phyllis wanted you just to reiterate again how much Horton originally paid per acre.
Okay, that deed of sale indicated $265 for 960 acres, which came out to, according to the deed, 27 point something cents an acre. Okay, so let's say 28 cents an acre. And then Davis paid $14 an acre.
And Susan Booth, just adding back to the previous conversation, suggested that it could have been a water flume, which was used to move water in the early days. Just to plug the presentation after this next one, so the one in January, we will be talking a little bit about water and infrastructure. So if you're interested in that, you should definitely tune in. The next question is from Robert Hudson. Were the bricks for the buildings made locally or were they imported?
That's a great question. And I tried to do a little research before I started. What I can tell you that there were some brick yards locally. Whaley had a brick yard. I don't know how large it was, and I don't know how much he was able to share, his business, the output with other areas. I also know that Frank Kimball down in National City had a substantial brick business, and I know that he shipped bricks to other parts of the city. And I don't know if that was later on, but he did send bricks for buildings up in the Hillcrest University Heights area. In fact, I think USC was building you know, a branch up in that area. And I believe the bricks supplied that were supplied for that building. So there were brick companies around, and I'm guessing that some of that was really local. Good question. Good question. Thank you.
The next question comes from Jean. So she was wondering what was going on in what we now call Old Town.
Well, the major fire in 1872 destroyed several buildings. It didn't wipe out the whole center of town. So several businesses were destroyed, but there were still families living there. If you recall from our discussion of Old Town, the Machado families, the Stewart families, they were still living there. So there were people, probably not a lot, but there were, you know, families that continued to live in the Old Town area. But there are pictures which show that by about 1872, I mean, the streets were, you know, it was nothing like paving. There were plants and, you know, scrub all around. So it really wasn't what we consider in good shape or being developed. Really, not much was going on there, but there were people living there.
The next question comes from Marty. They ask, was Roseville getting developed at the same time as Horton's Newtown? And how did they get along, presumably Horton and Lewis Rose, as they were both in the real estate business?
I don't know. It's a great question. And one that flipped through my mind from time to time. I did not investigate that. I do know that Roseville wasn't particularly successful, at least the community that Rose put together. And there, as far as I have read, was very little competition between development of Roseville and development of Newtown.
One last comment about the possible water flume. It does look quite flumy to me. Barbara Celia is saying the water flume looks like the remnants of one that ran through Del Dios. So I guess that would also, that's more evidence in favor of it being a water flume.
Okay. Del Dios, I'm not familiar. Where is that area located?
I actually don't know. I'm not familiar with it either. Hopefully Barbara will type something into the Q&A or the chat.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good stab at what that structure actually is. I'm trying to think about the flume company, the one that drew water all the way from the Cuyamacas into town. I'm wondering if it went through this particular area. Oh, now you have me on a roll here. I'll have to start looking up some of the geography and where that flume actually went to. Thank you.
Great. So Myra and Phyllis in the chat with the save. Del Dios is in Rancho Bernardo near Lake Hodges. Okay,
that's not it. Yeah, this is downtown area. I'm trying to, yeah. I mean, if you look in the distance, you can see this is the wharf. So this is maybe a bit uptown, but not in that area.
I think it looked enough like it, or the remains of one. So Susan
Yes.
says that the remains of the water flume located near Del Dios was near the Rancho Cielo housing development, and it still existed in the early 2000s. So, it's probably still around pretty
Okay.
entirely.
All right. We'll try and locate what this area is on this particular picture. Okay.
And then another comment on it from Charles. It looks like the photos on the north side of Mission Valley looking west toward the bay. Would you think that that's probably roughly correct? It's always kind of hard to tell with those pictures.
Yeah, I mean, I can't gauge distance, but this was obviously taken from the top of a hill somewhere. Okay, keep those cards and letters coming, ladies and gentlemen.
If I had a guess, I would say it's probably, I don't know, maybe around Bankers Hill or the edge of Balboa Park, looking, as Charles said, out toward Mission Bay, because you can kind of see the beginning of Point Loma on the left there. But pure speculation. Yeah, that's what Susan Booth also said too. Point Loma is visible on the left and the False Bay is visible to the right.
Okay, I got it. All right.
Does anybody else have any questions? It looks like most of them have been answered. That was a pretty good discussion on water flumes, actually.
Yes.
Myra, also to add to the water flume conversation, says that if this picture is in Mission Valley or near Mission Valley, then the water is probably came from the waterworks built by Philip Crosswaite. So that's kind of an interesting thing.
Okay. Thank you.
And Marty is saying that he's in South Bay, and it could be the view from here near Finney's Outlook. So it's kind of hard. We have so many man-made landmarks in San Diego that we navigate by, that sometimes it's a little bit difficult looking at something with all the man-made landmarks gone.
Right.
All right. Any other questions from anybody? Okay. So I think that will probably be the last of the question and answers for today. Please look out for our next presentation, which is going to take place, as Barry Slide said, on the 8th of December. And visit our website, www.sandiegohistory.org, for any more information, if you'd like to help support the History Center with a donation. I popped the link again for the YouTube channel and for the donation page into the chat, so if anybody wanted to take a look. And I think that'll just about do it. Thank you, Barry. Yep. Thank you, Justine.
Thank you, everyone, for attending and your great questions.
Have a very good day, you guys. Thanks for coming.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye.